In this episode, we discuss what looks like a growing consensus that COVID-19 originated from a lab. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man who on most episodes can be counted on to hit his spot with his takes. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, are you ready to see if you can go 30 for 30 today?
Always, man. I was when you said hit a spot, I had really gonna say a joke about me and my wife, but I'm gonna leave it alone.
But then I said
trouble.
Takes.
I said what I thought of. I said what it made me think of, not what you said. So
before we get started,
we'll keep it moving. I don't want to.
I was just moving forward. If you enjoyed the show, I ask that you subscribe and hit like on YouTube or your podcast platform. Doing so really helps the show out. Now, recording this on March 18th, 2025, and last week we saw a report from two German newspapers that back in 2020. The German Foreign Intelligence Service put an 80 to 90% likelihood that the virus behind COVID-19 actually originated from a lab and was accidentally released from China's Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, this follows the revelation from earlier this year that the CIA in the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency had a low confidence assessment that the origin of COVID was research related. So kind of a confirmation, or they're both saying the same thing in that sense. So Tunde, what's your reaction to seeing these releases, 5 years or almost 5 years after the fact? We're about 5 years from the pandemic. At this point, we're almost exactly 5 years from when the shutdown started happening. And when we've had a lot of argument in the meantime, in addition to dealing with the pandemic, there's been a lot of fighting over the origin of it and whether things should be done about that and cutting research and all that stuff. So that we're seeing these reports now, and in some of these that there was a belief of this back in 2020 even. What's your reaction to seeing this now?
I'm going to believe the intelligence agencies over Vladimir Putin. That'll be my assessment on this one.
This would be believing the intelligence agencies or believing the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah. So I just said that, of course, as a joke. But it's interesting because, like you said, I think that a lot of people already believe this, and this was already part of our cultural conversation, that this was most likely a man-made or at least an engineered virus that escaped the lab. And so to me, it just kind of confirms what a lot had suspected. I think you and I, people can go back and look at shows we had 5 years ago, were pretty neutral on this topic. We felt that, however it originated was probably less important than actually dealing with it and making sure it stopped spreading and all that. Yeah, exactly. So I do think that it is appropriate that we look back and put some closure on it. So I do think that it's good to see that, two major intelligence agencies that have been trusted with other kind of high level information are matching up on this one. And I think you're right. It's not a surprise that the Chinese government would deny that this was a leak. And so I think we're kind of still back where we were back then, with the assumption that it was a leak from gain of function research, blah, blah, blah. And the Chinese government's going to deny it because they don't want to be seen being the cause of a global pandemic. I will say this, though. It's refreshing to know that it wasn't from some dude in the mountains eating a bat, because that always, honestly, man, that did sound a little bit hokey to me, only because my next inclination was, well, how come this doesn't happen more often? Because I'm sure out of 8 billion humans on the planet, I'm sure not just in China, but there's other parts of the world where people are just randomly eating stuff in the wild. So
or blood
the fact that this doesn't happen
or something like that. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It just, that always seemed a little bit far-fetched for me.
No, I mean, I see for me, I think this is the time that we should be really looking at this closely. As you talked about in shows, we were doing shows, weekly at that time. And part of what we were discussing at that time was, okay, we need to figure out what we're dealing with and how to deal with it moving forward before we look back. And, you and I we've looked at the archives. We never were saying that it couldn't have been a lab leak. It was just whether or not it's a lab leak isn't necessarily going to help us in terms of how society can adapt and deal with it. So now that we've adapted and dealt with it, like COVID's here and, people kind of, are back to living their lives pretty much normally. It is the time to deal with all this. And so, okay, if this is related to gain of function research, where they're basically forcing evolution of these viruses in order to see what happens and to play it out, which crazy research happens all over the world. But if this happens, and then if there was a leak, then there needs to be measures taken to make sure something like this doesn't happen again at minimum. And then if you want to look into liability and all that stuff, fine. But that the most important thing from a societal standpoint is to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the question of whether or not it was a lab leak is very important to resolve ultimately, but wasn't important in 2020. It is important in 2025. And so when we're looking at these intelligence agencies, what's interesting to me about this also is that these reports are saying that they concluded this back in 2020. So it didn't take years of forensics to figure out that they're getting 80 to 90% likelihood that that's what they believe. And this is their job. They're not doing this from a political standpoint. Now, I think the political angle, though, I want to get to as well, because what I found the conversation about this at the time and looking back on it very interesting, because a lot of times the effort to pin this on China, so to speak, and say, oh, this is China being the people that were saying they did it on purpose, that was kind of nutty all along, because China suffered just as much as everybody else, if not more. So that part about it, but just this like, oh, China did this, and China needs to pay, or we need to make people of Asian origin, or we need to make them feel bad, call it a China virus or something. There would seem to be more going on with that, because that seemed to cloud the discussion of the origin. Is like, okay, we want to discuss the origin so that we can try to lash out at somebody else about this. And maybe that's kind of the animal instinct of it is, oh, something bad's happened to me, so I want to lash out at somebody else. But I did find that oftentimes you had people diverging into camps with the discussion of the origin piece. Not necessarily, nobody had more information than anybody else. But because if one person that you disagreed with on a lot of stuff were saying it was a lab leak, then a lot of times I would see people who, generally speaking, may be very rational people, just automatically say that that's not true. Not say, oh, I'm going to stay in the middle and I don't know, but say, no, it's not a lab leak, that we haven't seen that yet. And it's like, so it was this kind of divergence, this natural divergence. Or if somebody you agree with said it was a lab leak, again, they have no more information than anybody else, but you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go with the lab leak because it's about me either siding with this person or siding against this person or that person or whoever, depending on who you believe, who you trust, who you want to be in camp with, which was really interesting because nobody, from a public information standpoint, nobody really knew anything.
Yeah, well, I'll start on that last part. The fact that no one really knew anything has never prevented people from talking about stuff they know nothing about, right? So that's why as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, that's going to be the explanation of humanity.
That makes it easier to start weighing in wildly.
No, but it's interesting because you said good stuff and a lot there. So I want to actually start.
Well, let me just real quick. My point being,
you gotta let me get in there, man.
Well, but no, because I said I want to harmonize that in light of what you just said. Like, it wasn't like it was Angela Merkel, whose intelligence services, the German intelligence services, was the one weighing in on one side, and then it was the Chinese Communist Party weighing in on the other side. It wasn't like people who had more information arguing. It was people who didn't have information arguing. Yeah. Basically. So that was my point there.
That makes my point even more funny because we've learned that generally it's the people with the least information that have the greatest opinions and argue the most.
The strongest opinions,
yeah, and online and everything else. So, I mean, not to go sideways on this conversation because this isn't the topic at hand, but think about the arguments from people who weren't well versed in medicine or science about things like the vaccine.
Yeah.
Or should it be ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or whatever, right? So not that that's I know that's not the topic at hand, but it's just an example of how these type of disruptions in our society cause a lot of arguing. But you said something, and I wrote a note here. China was a scapegoat for some. And I thought about the term scapegoat in its actual definition, which comes from the idea that, if it didn't rain or something back then, the gods, were thought to be punishing us. We had to go kill a goat, right? As humans, we had to go sacrifice something. In more modern times, this might sound a little bit gruesome to some, but one could say the culture in America and the American South in the early 20th century, blacks were the scapegoat. If something happened in the society, you go do a ceremonial killing, you put a black guy on a tree and hang him. Yeah. And that was a way the culture got.
That was like a release. That was like a release. Like they're out there having picnics and stuff. Yeah.
A pressure valve release. And I think for some, that needed it in 2020 when this big scary thing happened, which was a global pandemic with a pathogen, a virus that travels airborne. I mean, this isn't even Ebola where it's by the touch, but it's just something you can't even see. We had all this changes like social distancing and having to wear a mask and shutdowns and all that, which is all new. And so
and remember, it was very haphazard because we were trying to figure out what was going on while recommendations were being made.
Yeah, we were literally building the plane as we were flying as a society. And so, for some people, and this isn't, I want to say, I was about to say something that makes it sound like I would be tooting our horns, let's say. And it's not about that. It's just that how we're wired. You and I are wired a little bit more to be intellectually skeptical about just random claims that we hear that aren't backed up.
About everything. So when someone, about things that I want to agree with, I'm still going to be like, all right, well, let's see if this is really real.
Yeah, I'll say this, because I'll speak for me. I won't speak for you, but I would say, my response when I see someone that appears to be coming from a place not of good faith in their argument, I will be skeptical of their argument. Later, if I find out if the facts show that it's true, I'll have to question my own judgment then and say, I guess I got to bend to that fact if it is true. And I'll give you an example. With this lack of we already discussed that at the beginning, you and I were saying that, this isn't the time to try and figure out necessarily the cause. Like you're saying, we got to build this plane while we're flying. Let's focus on the cause later. We know this is here. So when certain political actors and leaders in our culture came out and just called it the China virus, right? Or said this is the Wuhan flu, or acting like it was something China did on purpose. And like you said, I would think intellectually, well, China's got 1 billion people. Why would they let a virus out in their own country, which causes unrest?
To get back at everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. To get back at everyone else. For what reason? When the rest of the world's their customer, really, right? They're the manufacturing base of the world. So why would they want to make their customers sick? And then if you think about it, if you understand an authoritarian regime, the last thing China wants is a bunch of people upset and all the unrest, which we ended up seeing because of the way they did lockdowns. So this was a disaster for China in general. And so I was looking at it intellectually like that, but that's where my suspicion became or began, where I see people just saying, well, it's because it's the Chinese people. And because it was like, okay, hold on. I don't know if I can believe that. And then I'll end with this and pass it back. That's where my skepticism on why this may have been kept under wraps since 2020, because there may have been an effort by the political class in general, maybe globally, because this involves Germany and Europe as well, to just say, because remember, China is the biggest manufacturing base in the world. So they could have been saying, hey, we just don't want to put fuel on the fire to get the population thinking that China did this on purpose, even if we discovered this was.
But isn't that complete fabrication speculation as to why? Like you're saying now, you're leaping to say that now there's all this coordination between all these people. Like I don't think you need to do that. Like the question of why is this coming out now? Why didn't this come out then? Intelligence agencies know a lot of stuff, and I think this is a point we've made. Historically, they know a lot of stuff that they're not out there releasing or that they're not leaking. There's a lot of stuff that intelligence agencies are looking at, doing assessments here, doing assessments there. But generally speaking, they are strategic with what they're doing. So is there something to be gained by this, or is there something to be lost by that? So they can make individual assessments to decide, is it worthwhile leaking this to the press, or does that serve any purpose or not? So it doesn't have to be some grand conspiracy why different intelligence agencies might come to a similar conclusion based on similar sets of facts, because those are analytical people. And the idea of the analytical person versus the emotional person, the people who run intelligence agencies aren't the emotion-driven people. Like those people wouldn't be suited for that kind of role. And the reason I bring that up is because you talked about the scapegoat, and I wanted to bring it back to that real quick. I think that this is a blind spot for someone like you or somebody like me, that part of the calling it the China virus, in hindsight now, looking back, even though this thing looks like it was a lab leak from China, part of that was for the emotional release for the people that needed that. Some people, when something bad happened, needed someone to blame, and they needed someone to be angry at. And so leadership gave them somebody to be mad at. And now maybe that wasn't helpful for addressing the problem. If people look at this analytically, that's not addressing the helping the problem. That's causing undue pain to people, walking around America who may look Chinese. And it's like, well, why are people going to start being mean to them? So it's harmful in that way. It has all these negative effects, but some people needed somebody to be mad at. And so it's like, okay, yeah, let's serve them up some red meat for those people that want to be mad at. And maybe the people who, serving them up red meat, they needed somebody to be mad at too, So it's kind of like I don't want to tie someone who's emotion driven with weakness, but it does kind of illustrate if you are emotion driven, you may have needs that need to be fulfilled. And to some degree, humans are emotion driven, to some degree. So all of us, it's just all the spectrum, so to speak. But if you're on the higher end of that, like, you aren't able to just sit back and wait and deal with the pain and then say, okay, yeah, we'll figure out at some point where this happened, but let's figure out how to deal with the pain. You need somebody to be mad at. And I think that's kind of what, whether or not it was true at the time or whether it could be proved at the time, what it was about we got to give people somebody to be mad. The people who need somebody to be mad at, we got to give them somebody to be mad at. And, if it's going to mess some other stuff up, then that's what it is. And that's kind of what we saw, And so now, when this information is being released, because it's not an ongoing tragedy, then people aren't necessarily looking for somebody to be mad at about this anymore. So we can actually have that. People who want to have a rational conversation about it can have a rational conversation about it, and they can get into, okay, well, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again in the future?
Well, the interesting thing is, I guess, our society 5 years later has given everybody a lot more things to be mad about, no matter what the topic is or who they want to be mad at, right? So it's just funny because you're right. It's just like, yeah, that seems like so long ago, 5 years. But
I do want to get out of this topic, But so the last thing I did want to bring up is, when you're looking at this, like, the way that our society dealt with this. Looking back, I think we'll have to take some. We need to try. I mean, now questions: can we do this? Human beings tend to have to learn the lessons over and over and over again, the same lessons as a generation passes or a half a generation passes or whatever. But the lessons that we may be able to learn from this, like, do you think the way society is going now, are we going to be able to take from this what we've just experienced now, anything durable, or are we kind of like, this is old news now? This is like, all right, not really that interesting anymore. We kind of just like, yeah, it wasn't, we don't, again, the people who need the emotional satisfaction from some of this stuff, they don't need that right now, so they're not going to jump on this and be all over it. And then the maybe the planning apparatus from our society. I mean, you would hope that the intelligence services are communicating with them and saying, okay, well, if this kind of thing happens again, this is the kind of things that needs to happen. And then obviously there would be some uncertainty with that. So is there anything positive, bottom line, that we can take from seeing these releases in the public, and any public pressure that might come? Or do you see anything positive, or is this kind of like just, spitting in the wind at this point?
Spitting in the wind, baby.
So we have pessimistic too.
Think about it. Like I said, as a joke, but it's actually kind of sobering to realize that, 5 years ago, this was it. And think about how many emotional pressure valve releases we've been fed over the last 5 years. I mean, I'm just thinking DEI, CRT, transgender, gas stoves, private equity is going to ruin the world. Dr. Seuss, whatever it is that, the Bud Light, go woke, go broke, the whole thing, right? Moms for Liberty saying that, the schools were, teaching kids all this crazy stuff. And I mean, I could probably go on for an hour, right? And we're talking just the last few years. So I think that, and I'll give an example, James. This is interesting to me because I think that our information networks are so distorted. And this is where, again, this isn't about people being stupid, people being weak-minded. I had dinner with a guy on Friday, that a very smart guy, works for one of the largest investment firms in the world. And he's a nice guy. He's a really good person. We had a great dinner. We got on this topic, and specifically about the virus stuff and all that, and about Fauci. And he ends up asking, kind of telling me, well, wasn't Fauci kind of to blame for a lot of this because he was paying for the gain of function research in China? That's exactly how he said it. And I was like, whoa. I said, slow your roll, brother. and it's not that I was arguing with him. I just wanted to make sure we were dealing on the same plane of information. And that's tough to do. I mean, we had a good conversation, but without offending somebody and them taking it personal, because what I proceeded to tell him is, look, first of all, Anthony Fauci was retired when he was asked to come back and help the Trump administration deal with COVID. So I don't know how he could have been paying for anything unless he got a huge pension with billions of dollars every month that he can pay.
He wasn't paying for any of that personally.
Correct. Then I reminded him, because again, it's about how the system works, and most Americans just don't know. And this guy, again, very high up guy, very, very smart guy. I said, do you understand that Congress is the only one that appropriates funds in the United States for stuff that the government's doing and approving, like research on highly maybe volatile pathogens? Then I'm going to assume, I'm not in the government, but I'll assume that if we are paying for stuff that are being done in biological labs in other countries, this passing certain smell tests, right? The NSA, CIA, the president, the administration, they all know about this stuff. And then if Congress is appropriating these funds, at the minimum, the people on the committees who approved that know about it. So that's where it goes back to me. When I heard people in Congress in 2020, 2021, blaming people like Fauci personally and all that, that's again where I looked at it as a bad faith argument, because I'm sitting there saying to myself, well, hold on, you're in Congress and you know that only you can be the one in control of paying for this type of research. So if Congress is the one to pay for it, Congress clearly approved it. So again, this looks like you're trying to, again, pressure valve. You're trying to take the public's emotion, which is unhappy right now, and instead of being a real leader and coming out and explaining what maybe the benefits of gain of function research are and why it makes sense for countries around the world, even adversaries, to collaborate on these things, which again, I may or may not disagree with or agree with. Instead of doing that, you as a leader, meaning this person, so-and-so in Congress, and there's many so-and-sos, I'm not pointing at one person here, you take the other route and give the public something you feel they want, that pressure release, which also then misdirects them into looking at things that aren't factual.
Well, but part of that,
that's why I don't think it gets any better.
Well, but part of that, though, and this, I guess, piggybacks on your point, is that for our leadership right now, the idea of integrity is not something we're selecting for. Just by and large, like, of course, there are some people with integrity in our leadership, but that's not one of the qualifications that by and large people are looking for. It's about fundraising. It's about charisma. It's about a lot of other things. Integrity is very low on that. And so if you don't have if you're not selecting for integrity when you're talking about your leadership, then when the pitchforks come out, you're not going to have a bunch of people standing up like, "Hey, calm down, calm down." It's not that. They're going to be sitting there, point the pitchfork over there. Like that. Of course. And so
it's opportunistic.
Exactly. It's a way not only to divert attention from a role you might have had in it, even though, again, they're not saying that's not to say that you were, doing this, as some Bond villain, like, sinister. Yeah. But just like, you were rubber stamping stuff as it came through, because it's like, oh yeah, this is just what we're doing type of thing. But you don't want people looking at you, so it's like you misdirect, and then you leverage that anger and so forth in order for your own personal gain. So, I think that you're probably right that we're spitting in the wind. I do think that ultimately, though, it is better for this type of information to come out. Now, I'm not getting involved in when spy agencies decide to make stuff public. Again, I walk around with the assumption that all of these spy agencies know a lot more stuff than we in the public walk around knowing. And
of course,
there's no mechanism that causes that stuff to be released on regular intervals or anything.
I'm just waiting for the Jeffrey Epstein release. What's up? Because they must know about that. Somebody was listening and watching that stuff. Well, okay, sorry.
That you can take that one if you want, but I'm just saying generally. I'm speaking just purely generally. So, it is, though, to the benefit, I think, and maybe this is naive, again, because you talk about information networks and how things, get manipulated, how things get kind of presented in ways to craft certain appearances and so forth. Is it better, that information ultimately comes out? Should it all come out right away? Because of the way our information systems, like this is different if information doesn't travel so fast. That Germany sits on this for 5 years before they release it, But I don't know the right answer. The issue, though, of information eventually coming out, definitely good. Maybe, though, in the future, information from these spy agencies and stuff like that does need to come out sooner, so that at minimum we don't just have the people who don't know anything weighing in with the strongest takes, but some people who do know stuff actually can weigh in as well. And then at least it's a fair fight on whether or not you're not just stuck saying, oh, we'll just wait and see. Oh, we'll just wait and see. Oh, we'll just wait and see, if you're trying to be fair and honest about it. So, there may be some adjustments that need to be made in kind of the modern information ecosystem is kind of where I land on that. But I think
you've always said incentives and current
incentives determine it all. Definitely.
Yeah, and current leadership globally, it's starting to look like is incentivized by allowing disinformation to proliferate. So
they have been for a long time. Because keeping the public distracted is, generally speaking, a better way to consolidate the spoils of society amongst you and your friends. With and the public can worry about all this other stuff. So that incentive is not in our favor.
All right, you're making me depressed. Close us out. I'm just gonna get my tax.
You're the one that agreed that it was spitting in the wind. But now that we gotta wrap this topic up before this gets any darker. But we appreciate it.
I'm just gonna take my tax cut and move on after that one. Let's go. I'm depressed.
But we appreciate everybody for joining us on this part. We'll have a second part as well, and we'll talk to you soon.